This is the AMD Radeon 7900 XT. It released back on December the 13th, 2022 for a US MSRP of $900. However, in 2024, the US MSRP was cut down to just $750, but you can often find it for around $700. Hi, this is Rock on Tech, and today we're taking a look at the 7900 XT in 2024. And thanks to a subscriber and Patreon member, Shadow Fox, I'm able to make this video for you because he sent me this card. AMD did not send me this card, Shadow Fox did. So if you appreciate this content, drop a comment down below telling Shadow Fox that you appreciate him taking a chance on me and sending me this card. Thank you, man. I really do appreciate it. And now let's talk about the 7900 XT. As you can see, this 7900 XT is in fact the reference model with a triple fan design. It looks very similar to the reference model for the 7900 XTX. And now on the screen, you can see some of the specifications listed for the 7900 XT. I will leave them up here for a little bit just for you to look at. You can pause the video and take a look at all the specs if you want to. But the main thing I want to point out here is that this card has 84 compute units and a boost frequency up to 2400 megahertz, support for both HDMI 2.1 and DisplayPort 2.1, as well as a USB Type-C, an AV1 encoder, and 20 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM. Now, if you look at my channel, you'll notice I do have a lot of GPU content on here, but noticeably missing is the 7900 XT. And that's because at launch, I wasn't really excited for it. My mindset was very similar to a lot of other reviewers and frankly even gamers. If I'm gonna pay $900 for AMD's second best GPU, I might as well put another $100 with it and go and get the very best they have to offer, which was the 7900 XTX, which was not only faster, but also had 4 more gigabytes of VRAM. It just made sense. I think the Achilles heel for the 7900 XT was the initial launch price of $900. However, today in 2024, the new US MSRP is only $750, and quite frankly, you can find it very often for less than that. I've seen it go for as low as $650 to $700 at times, and honestly, for that price, that is definitely a fair price in today's GPU market. Now, very often I get questions about, hey, is this GPU good for 1440p? Is this GPU good for 4K? Well, with the 7900 XT, I will say this card is definitely a 1440p card. Yes, you can use it at 4K, but just know that at 4K, it's going to be a solid 4K 60 FPS card. Obviously, it's going to vary based on the game you're playing. Some games will be higher than 60 FPS and some games will be lower. And I am talking about benchmarking while using ultra maxed out settings, right? Clearly, if you use upscaling, if you lower the settings, numbers will change, obviously. But on average, I would say that the 7900 XT is a rock solid, high FPS 1440p card, and you can even do 4K 60, and obviously for 1080p, it's going to be overkill. If you're looking to play at 1080p, I would recommend saving some money and going with a cheaper card, but that's just me. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about today's benchmarks and how that's going to work. On the screen right now, you can see the test bench that I used for all of these benchmarks. We're using the 7900 XT paired with an Intel 14900K. The motherboard is an Asus TUF Gaming Z790 Pro Wi-Fi motherboard. The AIO is what I recently reviewed from Asus, which is their TUF Gaming 360 AIO. The RAM is 32 gigabytes of DDR5 running at 7200 megahertz. The AMD driver is 24.2.1. The operating system is Windows 11 Pro. And for those who may be curious, the BIOS settings with the Asus motherboard is Let BIOS Optimize. It is Asus's default BIOS settings. Now, all the games are ran at their maximum quality preset at 1440p and 4K. I did not use ray tracing and I did not use any form of upscaling or frame generation technology of any kind. During the benchmark session, you will see on the left 1440p and on the right will always be 4K. For games that have a built-in benchmark, I will tell you what the final average FPS is according to the in-game benchmark. And for games that do not have an in-game benchmark, you can just see the MSI Afterburner stats on the screen. And finally, towards the end of the video, I'll do a little bit of overclocking. I did not have time to really get in there and spend several hours doing a manual overclock, but what I did want to showcase is AMD's built-in auto overclocking functionality. And while the results are not massive, There is free performance there at the push of a button, and I will show you what that looks like towards the end of the video. Now, without any further ado, let's talk about the benchmarks. Okay, first up, we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. I ran the in-game benchmark 1440p on the Extreme preset and 4K on the Extreme preset. According to the end of the benchmark run, the final average for 1440p is 176 FPS, and at 4K, it drops down by 70 FPS to just 106 FPS on average. When you look at the MSI Afterburner stats, you can see that our temperature is between 67 to 70 C max, which is really not bad at all. We are getting full 100% GPU utilization both at 1440p as well as at 4K, and we're finishing at 1440p with 88 FPS on our 1% low, whereas over at 4K the card does unfortunately perform noticeably worse with a 1% low of 48 FPS. Next up is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Again, I ran the in-game benchmark on the Ultra preset for both 1440p and 4K. The final average for 1440p is 151 FPS, and the final average for 4K is 92 FPS. This time around, our GPU utilization is between 98 to 99%, and our GPU temperature is sitting solid at both resolutions around 65 C. The 7900 XT is pulling between 307 to 310 to 11 watts, and our 1% lows at 1440p are around 84 to 85 FPS, give or take, and at 4K our 1% lows are around 60 FPS. And the VRAM utilization here at 4K max settings is only a little bit over 10 gigabytes, so we still have plenty of room to spare with our 20 gigabyte VRAM limit. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077. This is on the Ultra preset with no ray tracing and no upscaling. The final average at 1440p is 120 FPS, and the final average at 4K is 54 FPS. Our 1% lows at 1440p are around 98 FPS, and our 1% lows at 4K are around 42 to 43 FPS. The GPU temperature is doing fairly well at around 71 to 72 C, and even at 4K Ultra settings, our total VRAM utilization is just a little bit under 9 gigabytes. All in all, not too bad. Cyberpunk is even demanding without ray tracing. Next up is God of War 2018 on the Ultra preset. At 1440p, we're averaging around 159 to 160 FPS, and at 4K, we're averaging around 98 FPS. I do think the game may be capped at 160 FPS max because I never went above that, even at 1440p. So I'm not sure if there's some kind of in-game engine limit at 160 FPS or what, but either way, 160 FPS isn't bad at all. Our GPU temperature is in the 60s, so that's very good. Our GPU utilization is sitting strong at 100% utilization, and even at 4K Ultra, we're just a little bit under 8 gigabytes of VRAM being utilized, and our 1% lows at 1440p are just under 130 FPS, and our 1% lows at 4K are just above 80 FPS. Next up is Hogwarts Legacy. I'm running the game at 1440p and 4K on the Ultra preset, and I'm running around in Hogsmeade. At 1440p, our average frame rate is about 137-ish FPS, and at 4K, our average frame rate is about 75 to 76 FPS. And at 1440p, our 1% lows are around 75 FPS, and at 4K, our 1% lows are around 54 to 55 FPS. The GPU temperature at both resolutions is under 70 C. We are getting 100% GPU utilization, and at 4K Ultra, our VRAM is just a little bit above 12 gigabytes, so this is definitely a game that is using a little bit more VRAM when compared to other games on the list. Hogwarts Legacy is a game that is very heavy on the CPU side, and it's not a game that is known for running incredibly well, especially early on out the gate. As you can see with the frame time graph, it could be a little bit smoother, but overall these are definitely playable frame rates. Next up is Starfield on the Ultra preset. I'm walking around New Atlantis. At 1440p, our average frame rate is about 102 FPS. At 4K, our average frame rate is about 65 FPS. Our 1% lows at 1440p are just under 80 FPS, and our 1% lows at 4K are just above 50 FPS. The GPU temperature is right around 67 to 68 C for both resolutions. Our GPU utilization is holding strong at 99%, and even at 4K on the Ultra preset, we're only using about 8.5 gigabytes of VRAM. Next up is everyone's newest favorite game, Helldivers 2, and I'm running the game on the Ultra preset. At 1440p, our average frame rate is 90 FPS, and at 4K, our average frame rate is 48 FPS. Our 1% lows at 1440p are 86 FPS. Our 1% lows at 4K are 43 FPS. The GPU temperature is between 64 to 65 C for both resolutions, and we're getting about 98 to 99% utilization at both resolutions. At 4K Ultra, we're only pulling in about 8.5 gigabytes of VRAM. Overall, this game could use a little bit more work in terms of the optimization department, and I think once that happens, we will definitely see a performance uplift, especially at 4K. But still, this is a game that is fairly demanding because it is so large with a lot of detail in the open environment. Next up, I decided to overclock the 7900 XT, and I did this by utilizing the auto overclock feature within the AMD Adrenalin software. You can get more performance if you take the time to do a proper manual overclock, but that does take some time and some trial and error. And as you can see, it gave us a new clock speed of 2853. But the important thing to note here is that that's what it is going to try and target, to the best of my knowledge, but we're not actually going to hit that. But clock speeds aside, do we see a performance increase at all? And to answer the question, yes, we do. The overclock settings on the right hand side show a higher final average of 182 FPS when compared to the original stock final average of 176 FPS. Also, if you look at the 1% lows, you can see the overclock settings are giving us better 1% lows. This is free performance, so if you don't feel like spending the time to do a manual overclock, at least hit the button for Auto OC and see if you can get some free performance. Next up is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Again, I ran the in-game benchmark on the Ultra preset, and as you can see, our final average is about the same, so the overclock here is not giving us a better average overall. But if you pay close attention to the 1% lows, you will see that as the benchmark goes on, the OC settings do seem to hold a higher 1% low over the standard settings. Like right here, for example, I'm looking at 91 FPS versus 83 to 84 FPS, and so the 1% lows are better with the overclock, but the overall average is more or less about the same. Now, I said earlier that we would probably not be able to hit 2800 megahertz, and that was true for Call of Duty. But if you look at Assassin's Creed here, we are hitting 2800 megahertz and technically a little bit above that. But even though we are actually able to clock in at that speed, it's not really leading to a better performance improvement. So Assassin's Creed Valhalla is definitely a weird game when it comes to benchmarking. I almost didn't include it for that reason, but hey, here's the data for those who are interested. And now for the final game that I will do the overclock comparison with, I have Starfield 1440p on the Ultra preset, and as you can see, the overclock settings do give us a little bit higher of an average frame rate. You're looking at about 101 to 102 FPS at stock versus about 108 to 109 with the OC. Obviously, as I'm talking, these numbers are falling, but the OC is still ahead of stock, and the 1% lows are slightly better on the OC than they are with stock. But as the benchmark progresses, you can see that stock and OC are coming closer and closer together. Again, it's one of those situations where it's not a lot of performance at all, and you can definitely do better with a manual overclock, but it is free performance at the push of a button, so hey, why not? Okay, let's talk about my final thoughts about the 7900 XT. Overall, I think it's a great GPU. I really do. I think the 20 gigabytes of VRAM is something that you really can't scoff at. I mean, for crying out loud, our PC community has been arguing for the last year or so about 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Is it enough? Is it not enough? Okay, you need 12. Okay, you need 16. None of that matters. If you have a 7900 XT, you're well above all of those numbers, and you're going to be covered for probably a few years. Maybe even more than a few. And also, if you have a 7900 XT, or if you're planning to buy a 7900 XT, and if you're okay with sticking at 1440p, I definitely think the 7900 XT will last you for many years to come. Now, in addition to that, it's an AMD card. So what does that mean? Well, anytime AMD releases a new software technology, more than likely it will be open sourced, which also means your 7900 XT will get access to that technology. That's not a guarantee, but typically that's how AMD does things. Whereas with Nvidia, for example, if you buy a 30 series card and then they announce the 40 series cards and they say, hey, we have frame generation, but it's only available on the 40 series card, well, now you got to go buy a whole new GPU just to get access to that one software technology. AMD is not doing that. And so what I'm saying here is that when you go with the 7900 XT, it gives you a little bit more room for future proofing, if you will. I hate using that word because there's no such thing as future proofing. I like to call it future delay, meaning the better product you can buy now with the most features possible will delay when you'll have to upgrade in the future. And even though the 7900 XT has been out now for well over a year at this point, it still has a lot of life left in it, and I definitely think it's a good card. The problem is you have people now waiting for the inevitable upcoming GPUs in a year or less from now. Hey, why would I buy now if I can just wait a little bit longer? In addition to that, you also have the 7800 XT, which I did a full video for here on the channel. Spoiler alert, I gave it a glowing review. It's a great card. And now you have the newly released 7900 GRE, which I have a video coming up on that. Get subscribed so you don't miss it. So the 7900 XT has a lot of competition, not just with Nvidia, but also within AMD. So, I mean, that's kind of the problem. But what I will say is this: if you're interested in buying a 7900 XT, or if you've already purchased one and you're just trying to figure out, hey, did you make a good decision? I think you did. I do. I think it's a great card. It's a great performer, especially at 1440p. And the 20 gigabytes of VRAM, it's going to last you a while. Now, I didn't talk about ray tracing and I didn't talk about upscaling. And the reason why is because I'm a big believer in native raw rasterization. The moment you introduce ray tracing, your frame rate's going to tank even with Nvidia cards. And that's where upscaling comes in. But the problem is you're muddying the waters now, because now 4K is no longer 4K. If you're using FSR quality on 4K, really what you're doing is you're rendering down to 1440p. So it's native 1440p, and the AI or the upscaling technology is trying to upscale back to your display of 4K, and so it's making it look like it's 4K. It's a lot of fancy tricks and stuff, and it does a great job at fooling your eyes and the brain and all that. It looks good, but it's not native. It's just not. And then the moment you introduce performance or balanced or ultra performance, now you're really muddying things up. And so it's just easier to talk about the raw numbers, and that's what I did here today. At the end of the day, I think if you're going for a solid 4K card and you're trying to get high FPS, the 7900 XT is not for you. But if you want a really high performing 1440p card and the card that's going to last you for many more years to come, then the 7900 XT is definitely a good card. I definitely recommend it. If you're looking for a card that's the best at ray tracing, well, you're going to need to go buy a 4090, but I don't know if you want to pay $1,800 to $2,000 for one in the current market. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Do you have a 7900 XT? Do you think it's a good card? Do you think people should still buy it? I'm very curious to know your thoughts. Drop a comment down below. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor. Hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If you're new, get subscribed. And until next time, E-Rock out.